What year did you go into the infantry?
I went into the infantry in May of '67. Most of the guys went through basic and AIT. They were shipped off to Vietnam right away, but I was made a platoon leader. And so because of that, I was sent to a experimental leadership camp for 2 weeks. And then I went on to AIT. Since I was out of cycle, they sent me down to Fort Stewart. They hooked me up to a new company that was just starting down there. We were attached to a special forces unit. They gave us these different uniforms like Vietnamese and some East European looking stuff, and our job was to go out and intercept fixed-wing pilots in an escape and evasion course and turn them over to special forces. I was down there for 7 or 8 months, and we had orders for Vietnam, and they were rescinded because the Pueblo incident broke, so we were shipped up to the DMZ, and I spent 6 months out of my year tour over there. I was an E5 around then, and so I was a team leader. We manned the barrier fence, and we went out chasing or being chased by North Koreans. The last 6 months, when our unit rotated south, I worked my way into a gymnasium where I became the NCOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge of a gym. I lived in a gym for 6 months and made it into a martial arts center. So I had teachers from the Korea Judo College coming from Seoul, and we had the best martial artists up in that area that came and taught in our gym. So I basically trained 24/7 for the last 6 months. Then I got out and came back and went to the University of Iowa.
When you were on the DMZ, you've mentioned in the past that it was kind of a war that nobody knew of.
I don't remember the number of dead and wounded we had. It wasn't nearly like some lonesome hill in Vietnam. People were getting shot up, but there was more than that. It was the landmines. They were everywhere. And also I was exposed to Agent Orange for 6 months when I was up there. So I think it took its toll on me pretty fast, and I suppose still does today.
You developed a practice early that you have credited to your resistance to any of the effects that others might have gotten from the Agent Orange. If we can go back to your childhood, you had a very unlikely teacher down by the river.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I was probably about 9 years old. And like I say, the hobos would build little shelters down there. And I was walking along the river one day, and I heard this sound coming out of this area, just beautiful sound. I traced it to this guy who's laying on his back, and he had a little weight on his stomach, and he was holding a greasy ball between his arms, and he had a diatonic harmonica. And he was making the most amazing sounds. I stood there on guard, ready to run in case he was crazy. He was wearing an old World War II undershirt and kind of frail looking. And when he stopped, he looked at me, and all I could think to say was, "How did you learn to play like that?" And he said, "I'm not playing, son, I'm praying." And he started doing it again, and eventually asked him if he would teach me how to do that. At first he said no. And I came back the next day, and I brought him some water, and I might have brought him some food, I don't remember. But I asked him again, and he said, "Okay, I'll teach you, but you can never, ever let anyone hear you." I agreed, and so for the next 3 weeks, I went to visit him. It was right before school started. I think I was going into 4th grade. And then one day he disappeared. I think it had rained, if I remember, and I came back, and water had leaked through the shelter, and he was gone, and I came back the next day, and he was still gone. He showed me where he hid his harps. They call them harps back then, but it was a harmonica today. So eventually I looked in, and the harps were still there. And he had a book laying, it was all wet. I just remembered that on the cover it said 4 letters, Y-O-G-A. And I later found out it was yoga. That was my introduction to yoga. But when I realized he wasn't coming back, I took the harps, and I kept coming back to see if I could give them back to him. And he never came back. But right before he disappeared, I asked if he would change his mind and let me do it around other people. And he told me no. He told me to go to cemeteries and to monuments. He told me what a monument is, and said, "You go and pray for the dead, and you pray for the heroes." And I said, "But you let me hear you." And he looked at me really seriously, and he said, "Son, you're going to know when it's time to be heard." So I practiced in private with that weight on my epigastric triangle, and I'm sure that it made a huge difference in my life. In maybe the early 2000, I think it was, I began reading now hospitals and clinics around the country are using harmonicas or harps for COPD, PTSD, and I eventually learned that soldiers during World War I from Great Britain and Germany were issued harmonicas, and they were widely used during the Civil War, and they disappeared in the USA around World War II because we couldn't get them from Japan and Germany because we were at war with both countries. But prior to that, there were harmonica orchestras all over the United States. So I realized that I'd been given a tremendous gift. When I read about it being used for medical problems, I began thinking that, okay, now I think it would be all right for me to share it. So I've been teaching a few people how to do it. Yeah, what a wonderful gift that was.
Your time in Korea came to an end. You'd been running a gym by this point in your career. How old were you at this time?
So I was probably around 23, 24 when I came back and went to the University of Iowa. I took a judo class, and all the liberal arts students had to take so many hours of PE. They had all these skills from which they could choose, and judo was one of them, but they had a high-level Korean instructor, and he had just left. So the teacher said, hey, why don't you teach it next semester? So suddenly now as a sophomore in college, I'm teaching in the skills department at the U of Iowa, and not long after the yoga teacher left, and since I had long hair and a beard, the supervisor said, why don't you teach yoga? I said, I don't even know what it means. So that was probably around 1971 or 72, I don't remember, but that was the beginning of a more serious study yoga, and I focused in on hatha yoga, the physical side of it. That was my beginning of that.